We're going to work on the distributive property again. We did this before the social distancing time, and I just want to review it again, make sure we understand it. There's two ways. There's one's making it longer or bigger, and then there's one that's making it smaller. And this one we're going to work on extending it or making it larger. A problem like this one, it's 3 times the quantity of 2 plus 5. When there's no space between these, that means multiplication. So anytime there's a number and a letter or a number with a parentheses with no spaces in between, it's multiplication. So on this one, it's really just spreading it out. Anything that on the outside, we can multiply by 3 times 2 for this one would be 3 times 2, but then we also have to multiply this side. That was not, it's not automatic. Don't just do the first one, you do that second one. So then it would be 3 times 5, and we are adding, that does. So then it would be 3 times 5, 3 times 5. Now you might say, well, we're still going to get the same answer if we just took 3 times the 7. Yeah, that's not the point. The point we're really trying to do is when we would use a variable. So when we use a letter. So on this one, this is 5 times the quantity of 8 plus 2. There's no space between these, so you know that it's multiplication. You do 5 times 8, and then 5 times 2. Make sure you do both. So I'm going to write it as 5 times 8, and remember it raised dot like that means multiplication, plus, that does not change, 5 times 2. That's how you'd spread it out. So we're calling this spreading it out. When we do the distributive property, we're really using variables. Variable is just a letter. You say, well, why are we using letters in math? Well, it's just a letter that stands for a certain number. We might not know what that number is. It could vary. It could be more than one number at a time even. But it's just something that's unknown. Instead of putting a little box, we're putting a letter for it. So if A equals 3, in this situation, I would not need to have 3A, 3 times A, because it would be 9. I know it's 3 times 3. But if I'm not sure what it is and what that number would be, I could just have like 5A plus 2. Then I would know if I found out what A was, then I could solve that. And that's something we're going to get into a little bit later. In this case, for working through this, it's 3 times A. We're just spreading out just like we did before. No space between these, it's multiplication. 3 times A, then we have to have 3 times 5. Now you might say, what's 3 times A? It's just 3A. No big deal. Just call it 3A. Then 3 times 5. Just 3 times 5 is 15. So this spread out is 3A plus 15. You might say, well, what? Why would it be 3A plus 15? That doesn't give me an answer. It will later. This is just a step that we're going to go to be able to solve some equations later on. So for this problem, this is just 5b, does multiplication, 5 times b, plus, that stays the same, 5 times 9. So this is 5b plus 45. Hopefully this is making sense. It's not that hard. For this one, it's 2 times the quantity of c minus 2, no space between those, so I'm going to just multiply them out, and this would be 2 times c minus 4. You might say, why did you use c for this one, Mr. Morshauser? Just because I felt like it, that's why. You can use any variable. We try to stay away from x's, at least for these types of problems, because they look like multiplication signs. T's, you have to draw them kind of weird like that so they don't look like plus signs. So those are the only ones that are a little bit tricky. Z's too can look like, they can look like 2's, so you put a line through the z's. Those are variables. For this one, the variable's just on the back side. Can that be okay? Yes, that's okay. So 10 times 5 and then minus 10 times b. So this would be 50 minus 10b. They usually will write these first. They put those up in first, so that it's usually the variables and then the numbers afterwards. But in this case, this is fine. It's perfectly fine. On some IXLs, you may have done those already. This one would be, it's perfectly fine. It was the same thing. You could switch this thing to the front. Doesn't matter. But you just work it out the same way. So it would be 2 times 3, and then 2 times a. You're adding together. So it would be 6 plus 2a. For the next part of the lesson, click on the split screen link in Shobi. It'll say split screen. And you'll split the screen, put the Shobi one in on one side and put the YouTube one on the other. This is on my YouTube, John Morshauser's YouTube. And then do the problems on the left side. And then if you're splitting it that way, and then as soon as you're done with the problem, turn on and see if you did the answers correctly. You can choose to do like a whole side and then listen to them. That's up to you, but just to make sure, that's how we're working on that one, and make sure you hit submit when you're done when you hit done.